I was dead asleep when an explosion of red and blue lights came slicing through my front windows. Heart pounding, I stumbled up, half convinced I'd somehow left a TV show running. But no, these were real sirens screaming down our peaceful cul-de-sac. My phone buzzed with half a dozen frantic notifications. Through the blinds, I saw a police cruiser and a crowd gathered around the old tower in my yard, my family's historic tower. And there, just beyond the cordon, stood Karen, wearing that smug look I'd come to know too well, arms folded like she was the queen of the entire neighborhood. I felt my blood run cold. This was the third time in 2 months she'd called. The police in the dead of night, always claiming some new emergency. And now apparently, she'd found a reason to bring them here yet again, right at her M. I swallowed my anger and braced myself. If you've ever had that neighbor who acts like the entire street is her personal kingdom, you'll understand how I felt. But this time, she'd stepped way over the line, interfering with something far more important than petty aesthetics. That tower was my father's legacy, a registered historical structure we'd cherished for decades. Karen had no idea the chaos she'd just unleashed. Before we plunge headlong into this bizarre saga, let me ask, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how far these Karen tales travel. And while you're at it, smash that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. We have stories about HOA nightmares and the unstoppable Karens behind them every single day, so stick around if you enjoy a wild suburban showdown. I moved into my late father's property 6 months back, purely on a temporary basis. The place was old, perched at the end of Willowdale Drive, and featured a stone tower my father's grandfather had helped build sometime after World War II. That tower was more than a quirky leftover, it was recognized by the state as a historical site due to its unique architecture, rumored to be part watchtower, part old farmland vantage from a much earlier era. None of that stopped the newly minted HOA president, Karen, from disapproving of it. She'd won her position in a suspiciously underattended vote, and once she'd seized that power, she was unstoppable, scanning every property. With hawk-like eyes, searching for anything that offended her vision of uniform suburbia. At first, I encountered only minor scuffles, a typed slip telling me I needed to tuck my trash bins behind a fence, a friendly reminder that my mailbox clashed with the chosen neutral color scheme. But then came something so unexpected, so patently absurd, that at first I refused to believe it was real. One drizzly morning, exactly 2 days after I found that friendly reminder pinned to my mailbox, I woke up to see a small crowd gathered in front of my property, half of them armed with notepads and video cameras. They were mostly neighbors I recognized, plus a handful of strangers I'd never seen before. And at the center of this gathering, Karen, of course wearing a bright canary yellow raincoat that might have been fashionable if she hadn't also been toting her infamous pink clipboard, tapping it against her thigh like a gavel. I stepped out onto my porch, bleary-eyed, to see what the commotion was about. "Morning," I ventured, glancing over at one of the neighbors who at least looked friendly enough. He gave a slight shrug, as though to say he had no idea either. Then Karen cleared her throat in that pointed way. She did. "Attention, everyone," she announced. "We'll begin the historical tower tour momentarily." I nearly choked on my own saliva. Historical tower tour. That tower in my backyard was obviously historical, but in what universe was Karen hosting a tour? Without my permission, no less. The group, maybe 15 people, shifted excitedly, as though they'd paid for a ticket to some local heritage festival. A tall man with a camera around his neck asked Karen if this was the place that might be older than the entire neighborhood. She nodded so vigorously her ponytail bounced. I rubbed my eyes, half believing I was still asleep. I marched down the path toward them. "Karen," I said firmly, "what's going on?" She gave me a tight-lipped smile, the kind a sales rep might wear when they're about to pitch something outrageous. "Isn't it obvious?" she chirped. "We're giving the Willowdale community a chance to see your tower up close, get a look at the so-called historic architecture. We want to decide, as a group, whether it's truly worth the alleged preservation status you claim. If it's not, we can't let an eyesore remain unexamined." It was the single most brazen intrusion I'd encountered yet. Not only had she set up an entire tour on my property, she was basically framing it as some democratic referendum over my father's legacy. And she was throwing around words like so-called. The goal made my head spin. "This is private property," I said, my voice shaking. "You can't just gather people here for a tour without my consent. You can't invite strangers to Wander my backyard. We have real documents attesting to that tower's historical registry. This is not up for neighborhood vote. Karen raised one eyebrow. We have a principle called community assessment. If your structure is truly the pride you claim, you should be delighted to show it off. She turned to the crowd, a forced grin on her face. Everyone, please keep your phones out. We'll be documenting any design flaws or safety hazards for the official record. Then we'll collectively decide if the tower meets the standard to remain. I half expected a lightning bolt to strike just to underscore the insanity. Some of the onlookers looked uncertain, glancing my way as if seeking my approval or at least a hint of a welcome. Others were clearly enthralled, as though they'd come to see a spectacle. Possibly they'd been roped in by Karen's latest spiel about transparency or community decisions. I inhaled slowly, urging myself not to blow up in front of them. All right, I said quietly, this is obviously out of line. But let me guess, you'd love to film me shutting you down so you can claim I'm hiding something. So do you want to see it? Is that it? Karen's eyes glinted like I'd just offered her a gift. Yes, precisely. If you truly believe in your so-called heritage story, then let the neighbors see how stable it is. We can take notes, see if it truly qualifies under Willowdale's guidelines for aesthetic harmony. If it stands up to scrutiny, maybe we'll graciously approve it, as if the entire concept of a local historical registry was subject to approval by her brand new rules. One older woman in the group piped up, is it safe to walk around the base? Karen said it might have cracks or something. I forced a polite nod. Yes, it's safe. The tower's stable. It's been inspected by city officials, no cracks that compromise anything. I pointedly glared at Karen. But I'd appreciate if we keep this to the outside. The interior is locked, especially since some recent unauthorized attempts at entry. I'm sure you understand. Karen's mouth curved downward, disappointed she wouldn't get inside. The crowd, though, seemed to lighten up. They'd obviously been fed half-truths about danger or crumbled mortar, so letting them see the base might help quell rumors. Fine, I decided. Might as well. I guided the group around the side of the tower, pointing out the original stone masonry, the decades-old mortar that was reinforced a few years prior, plus a small plaque from the local heritage registry. Some neighbors whispered to each other, snapping photos, nodding in mild awe. You could sense their curiosity was genuine. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Then Karen began her running commentary. Note the uneven coloration here, folks. That indicates potential structural shifting, she said, pointing to a patch of stone that was just weathered. And observe the slight slope of the ground. Someone could twist an ankle. She wore an expression so grave it bordered on comedic. One neighbor, Miss Walters, said softly, it's just a bit of hillside, Karen. Nothing a garden step couldn't fix. Karen glared at her. We must be thorough, she snapped. Midway through this unsolicited tour, a younger couple approached me quietly, apologizing for intruding. They whispered they'd come because Karen told them the tower might be overrun with mold or pests. They were relieved to see no such thing. In fact, they joked it was more solid than their own house's foundation. My frustration softened a bit. These folks had simply been duped by Karen's fear-mongering. They seemed impressed that the tower was actually well preserved. We circled back to the front yard. The entire tour took maybe half an hour. Karen scribbled on her pink clipboard, reading off complaints like stone color mismatch, potential slip hazard on mossy corners, intrusive silhouette from certain angles. She had the nerve to spin around at the end and proclaim, we'll compile this data, and if the majority believes it's detrimental, we can proceed with official steps for removal or modification. I couldn't help myself. I laughed, a short, disbelieving bark. Majority? Official steps? Karen, you realize the city and state have recognized this tower as historically protected. Your data compilation means squat next to real law. A few people shifted uneasily. They probably realized I was right. Karen pressed her lips together, ignoring me. Then, clearing her throat, she addressed the group. We'll post an online poll. Keep an eye on the HOA site. Let's have a great rest of your day. Thank you for coming. As they dispersed, some neighbors avoided my eyes, others sheepishly apologized for being part of this spectacle. A pair approached me, shaking their heads. We honestly thought the board endorsed this official inspection, they said. She told us it was an HOA event. I sighed, explaining that the new board hadn't called any such event. They left, muttering about Karen's misleading approach. Meanwhile, Karen hopped into her car, gave me a parting glare, and sped off without another word. That same evening, the online poll Karen mentioned showed up, but not on the official HOA page, rather on some free poll-making site, linked in an email titled "Vote on Tower's Fate." The email text claimed your input matters. To keep Willowdale uniform, concluding with, if enough votes demand removal, we can push for legal solutions. The poll had no disclaimers, no mention of actual city codes, just a big yes, remove it, or no, keep it button. Many neighbors wrote to the new board, confused if it was real. The board swiftly posted a statement disclaiming any involvement. They also noted that the tower was not subject to a neighborhood vote. But Karen had done enough to stir the pot. Some gullible folks started calling me, asking, "What if the majority says tear it down?" My patience wore thin. I repeated, for the 10th time, that the tower was beyond the HOA's authority. But the drama continued. Curiously, the next morning, the poll results appeared in an email from Karen's old ally, Miss Caldwell, claiming a majority favored reworking or removing the tower. But several neighbors I trust said they'd tried to vote keep it, only for the site to glitch or not register. Then Miss Caldwell posted on the neighborhood APP, "The community has spoken. We strongly advise the tower's removal or radical redesign." The APP's comment section erupted. Half the neighbors slammed Caldwell for rigging the poll, the other half asked if this was truly official. The new board, fed up, pinned an announcement disclaiming every last piece of this fiasco. They threatened that if Miss Caldwell or Karen impersonated official HOA processes once more, the board would pursue defamation or forgery claims. This strong stance signaled that the nonsense might finally backfire. Yet somehow, Karen and Caldwell pressed on, booking a local community center space for an informal tower discussion the following Sunday. The user flyer read, "Willowdale residents to discuss next steps in tower removal." That was when I started suspecting we'd see an attempt at vigilante sabotage. Some unhinged group of believers might show up with sledgehammers if the board and I didn't intervene. When Sunday rolled around, my phone was pinging non-stop. Neighbors telling me they were heading to that tower discussion out of curiosity. Others texted me not to worry, that they'd stand up for me. The new board advised me to come, though it was not an official HOA event. So I went, armed with a folder of official city documents again, plus a handful of newly minted flyers from the city's preservation office stating the tower was under legal protection. My stomach churned, anticipating a repeat meltdown like the old fiasco with bulldozers. I stepped into the community center hall. A decent crowd had assembled, maybe 30-40 residents. Miss Caldwell stood near the front, flanked by 2 or 3 folks I recognized as part of Karen's old circle. Karen herself, though, was conspicuously absent. Maybe she planned a dramatic last-minute entrance. Miss Caldwell began with a spiel about the tower's uncertain legal standing and how neighbors had expressed fear of structural collapse or negative effect on property values. She pointed to a poorly made PowerPoint slide listing so-called risks, collapse hazard, insurance disclaimers, seismic worries, even ISO factor. The entire presentation used the same language as the poll, referencing no real engineering or city code. Then Miss Caldwell opened the floor for testimonies. Up stood one man who said he was a father of 2. He admitted that at first he believed the tower was safe, but the repeated warnings from Karen's group made him uneasy. Another neighbor said, "I just want proof the tower isn't going to cost me extra taxes." They were echoing the same invented fear. That's when I stepped forward, materials in hand. "Hello everyone," I said calmly. "I'm the tower's actual owner, for those who don't know me. I want to clarify a few things." I held up the city documents, reading from the official statement. There is absolutely no special levy, no city fee, no pending code violation. The tower is historically recognized. Period. A hush descended. Some frowned, others nodded in relief. Miss Caldwell tried to interrupt, saying the poll proved the majority wanted it gone. I retorted, that poll was rigged, not official, and even if 100% said remove it, we can't override state heritage law. Then from the back of the room came a clipped voice. "And who's enforcing that law exactly?" Karen strode in, arms folded as usual. She'd timed her entrance with theatrical flair. I exhaled, controlling my annoyance. She took her place up front, ignoring Miss Caldwell's uneasy expression. Karen turned to me, raising her voice so all could hear. Let me guess, you're going to wave around more outdated documents? The fact is, the neighborhood doesn't want your relic overshadowing our modern design. We have every right to unify, to insist on a new, safer approach. If you truly want to honor history, build a replica, or a smaller version. But this monstrous tower stands out like a sore thumb, and we are done letting you hold the entire community hostage. I nearly laughed at her choice of words. Hold the entire community hostage, as though my father's tower were some villain. I calmly replied that real laws outrank any volunteer poll or her personal preference. She opened her mouth to retort, but I cut her off. I also have statements from neighbors you harassed with phony city letters, forging new FEs. That's borderline mail fraud. Karen's face hardened. In that tense silence, Miss Caldwell tried to salvage the situation, stammering about concern for child safety, but a wave of neighbors began calling out, telling Karen and Caldwell to produce real city approvals, or stop making up stories. The new HOA chair, Annette, marched in, holding official documents from the city attorney disclaiming any tower tax. She read them aloud, systematically shutting down every false claim. The crowd murmured. A few folks turned on Karen with frustration, having realized she'd manipulated them through fear. Others demanded she stop sowing chaos. Karen gave one final attempt at moral high ground. I only ever acted to protect Willowdale from potential hazards and crippling FEs. If that's a crime, then so be it. The dryness in her tone didn't sway many. The new board spelled out that if she continued meddling, she might face real legal repercussions. The hush that followed was thick with tension. Then Karen, her eyes flashing, pivoted on her heel and swept out. It wasn't quite the meltdown of old, but it felt final. She'd cast her last die, found no supporters. This time, no one followed her out. The next day, a local journalist covering the fiasco posted an update. Willowdale's tower survives another attack. Karen's new anti-tower campaign falls apart. People across the city read it, and soon, the fiasco became a cautionary example of how quickly misinformation can spread in an HOA environment. Karen stayed quiet, presumably licking her wounds. She never apologized for the tower tour fiasco or the rigged poll. Miss Caldwell quietly moved away from Willowdale a month later, presumably to avoid further embarrassment or legal entanglements. The so-called tax letters vanished. The phony preservation fund never reappeared. Neighbors, meanwhile, regrouped. The new board decided to pass a transparency resolution forbidding any unofficial polls or property tours done in the HOA's name without a formal board sign-off. They also implemented monthly bulletins clarifying real city notices vs. fabricated rumors, ensuring no future Karen could manipulate people so easily. Over time, tensions cooled, replaced by a renewed spirit of solidarity. The tower stands triumphant. As ever, that grand, watchful silhouette at the edge of the neighborhood. Now and then, local families approach me, politely asking if they can walk around it, show their kids the old stone base. I usually let them, feeling proud to share a piece of living history. A teacher from the next district asked about scheduling a short lesson, so I've become an impromptu docent of sorts. Dad would have loved how many folks now appreciate the structure, rather than condemning it as an eyesore. Karen tried to spin fear into uniform mediocrity, but ironically, she ended up uniting people against her tyranny, forging deeper appreciation for the tower's uniqueness, and that's how an invented tax scare and sham tower tour nearly upended our community all over again, only to fail spectacularly once the truth came out. If there's any lesson, it's that you never underestimate a petty power seeker's willingness to stoop lower than you can imagine. But equally, never underestimate a neighborhood's ability to rally around what's right when they see evidence plain as day. Karen faded from the forefront, overshadowed by the old stone tower she so despised, while Willowdale emerged stronger for having confronted her illusions head-on. The big blow came 1 week later, though, when I found a formal letter pinned to my door. Attention, unauthorized stone tower may violate neighborhood uniformity clause, potential safety hazard. I read it 3 times, half laughing, half horrified. She meant my centuries-old tower, the structure older than half the houses on the block, and definitely older than the HOA itself. I decided it must be a misunderstanding, so I invited Karen over for a chat. She arrived with her arms locked around A bright pink clipboard, flipping through printed pages of rules. I offered coffee, showed her the official documents registering the tower with the local historical society, explained that city regulations exempted it from normal building codes and that my father had fought for that recognition for years. She didn't blink. Instead, she said, "I see no reason your tower should get special treatment. We prefer uniform design here in Willowdale." Alarm bells rang in my mind, but I tried to keep the peace. "It's historically protected," I repeated. She sniffed. "We'll see about that," then left in a huff. Over the next few weeks, the letter barrage intensified. One letter declared my tower a visual blight, another insisted I needed modern modifications to comply with height standards. A third came with a final notice that I had to remove or alter the tower to meet Willowdale uniform design guidelines. I tried replying each time, referencing the local heritage registry, the city's formal approval. She responded by slapping me with more violation notes. It reached comedic levels had it not begun to seriously stress me out. Karen threatened daily fines, which soared from $20 to $50 to $100 for every day I refused compliance. I forwarded them all to my lawyer. My neighbors told me she's done this to half the block, though not to such an extreme. Usually folks give in. One older couple apparently repainted their entire porch because she claimed it clashed with the warm grey palette she'd decided upon. Another replaced their mailbox on her say-so. The difference here, though, was that my tower wasn't something I could just repaint or remove. It was historically designated, and ironically, that was exactly why she wanted it gone. The real meltdown came one late afternoon. I was mowing the lawn behind the tower, and out of nowhere, a local policeman arrived, apologetically telling me that Karen had reported dangerous crumbling stones falling from my tower. The cop and I circled the tower. No crumbling stones. Everything's stable. The policeman said, "I'm sorry." She's claiming it's an emergency hazard. I thanked him. We parted ways. Karen watched from across the street, arms folded. She wore that smug grin like she'd accomplished some righteous deed. That was when I knew she wouldn't let this go. She relished the power to boss me around, ignoring the fact that actual codes and laws protected my property. She believed. Her personal sense of ugly overshadowed any old legal document. I braced for bigger trouble. Sure enough, she started calling the cops at bizarre hours, complaining about non-existent hazards. One time she insisted my floodlight on the tower was beaming into her window, so the police had to check light pollution. They found no such problem. Another time, at around PM, she called them for loud banging from the tower. I was inside watching TV. The officer who came said, "Look, you might want to file a harassment complaint. She's obviously using us to do her bidding," but I kept hoping the HOA board or the local city office would talk some sense into her. I sent the board copies of my tower's registration documents, plus notes from my father's attorney back. In the day, the board mostly shrugged, said Karen was overzealous, but they had no direct control over the content of her compliance letters. Meanwhile, my stress soared. My tower, that had always been a source of pride, my father's greatest gift to me, was now the center of near-constant conflict. I'd grown up hearing stories about how my great-grandfather had partially designed it with local architects, believing it might one day become a small museum piece in the region's farmland heritage program. To see it threatened by a petty neighbor with a fancy new HOA title stung more than I could describe. Then came that call. I was half lost in a dream when I saw the swirling red and blue lights flood my windows. Dazed, I opened the door to find not just one, but two patrol cars, a cluster of sleepy-eyed officers, and a neighbor or two gawking from their porches. And there was Karen, arms folded, explaining to the police that my tower was unstable. And moments from collapse, she'd apparently convinced the dispatch operator that the tower threatened to topple onto her property, risking bodily harm. The cops were checking the ground with flashlights, trying to measure angles with rudimentary methods. One shook his head, politely telling Karen there was no sign of imminent collapse. She insisted they get an emergency demolition crew to tear it down before dawn. I nearly lost it. The tower had survived storms, minor earthquakes, decades of normal wear and tear. No official engineer or inspector had found it wanting. But Karen insisted, waving her HOA binder, claiming she had a compliance consultant's report. When the officers asked for it, she rummaged around, muttered something about forgetting it at home. They politely concluded their business. told me I was free to go back inside, no hazard found, and left. Karen sputtered, making phone calls well past AM in front of my yard. I recall watching her from my window, thinking, she's crossing the line from petty to dangerous. I hoped that fiasco marked the peak of her madness. But about a week later, I woke to a thunderous roar around 7 in the morning. Rushing out, I found a small bulldozer parked next to the tower, the driver looking uneasy. Karen stood by, instructing him to clear away the hazardous stone section. She claimed the board had approved an immediate partial demolition. My heart pounded. This was exactly the nightmare scenario I dreaded. Immediately, I demanded the driver stop, waved my documents. The tower's on the local historical registry. You can't even touch it without a city permit. He hesitated, said he was just following the HOA president's directive. Meanwhile, Karen stared at me coldly, declaring, I have the right to protect neighbors from your crumbling structure. That's when I dialed 911 myself. Let the real cops figure it out this time. The bulldozer operator, seeing me on the phone, cut the engine. Karen got red in the face, tried to claim I was obstructing a safety operation. Soon enough, squad cars arrived, as well as a city inspector I'd frantically called. They took in the scene a nearly historic tower, a roaring bulldozer, no demolition permit, and Karen with her arms folded. The city inspector's eyes bulged. He asked Karen, on what authority are you demolishing a protected structure? She rattled on about HOA uniform guidelines. The inspector gave me a disbelieving look, as though silently asking, is she serious? I shrugged helplessly. The cops told the driver to remove his bulldozer from private property at once unless he wanted to be liable for serious damages. That ended the standoff with minimal harm to the tower, a scratch or two, but no major collapse. But ironically, in saving my tower from immediate demolition, that fiasco turned it into a bigger news story. A neighbor had recorded half the confrontation on his phone, posted it online, and it went minor viral within the county. The local paper reached out, wanting an interview about a historic tower under threat. I decided it was time to shine a bigger spotlight on the problem. That's how Karen's crusade turned into a full-blown fiasco, with the press, the city council, and the entire Willow Falls board all stepping in. Within days, a city official phoned me, verifying details about the tower's protected status. He explained that once a property is on a local or state registry, it can't be torn down without a thorough legal process, including special permits, engineering reviews, and so on. He confirmed that Karen had never approached them for any demolition approval. I told him about her midnight police calls, the random bulldozer. The official was aghast. Meanwhile, rumors swirled that the HOA's insurance might drop them if they faced a lawsuit for damage to a registered site. Several of Karen's board allies grew nervous, telling me privately they'd never endorsed a demolition, that she was acting alone. Karen, on the other hand, doubled down on her claim that the tower was structurally unsound and I was endangering the entire neighborhood. She brandished photos at an emergency HOA meeting, pointing to old bricks or chipped mortar as if it were proof. The board asked if any licensed engineer had declared it unsafe. She said, my compliance consultant says so, but said consultant never appeared, never had a name or credentials. The board smelled a lie. At that point, the fiasco turned from a personal grudge to a neighborhood standoff. Many neighbors who had once quietly obeyed Karen realized she might lead them into huge legal trouble. They started challenging her other edicts too, like banning certain garden ornaments or ordering people to remove porch swings. The board scheduled a membership vote on whether to strip Karen of her HOA presidency, but she had jammed the rules so thoroughly that no one was sure how to proceed. Meanwhile, local media took interest. A short piece on the news featured an interview with me, showing the tower from outside and the partial damage from the bulldozer scrape. The reporter ended with, we reached out to Karen for comment. She declined. Suddenly, city inspectors, state preservation officers, even a local historian arrived to photograph the tower, collecting evidence in case Karen tried another stealth demolition. I realized then how insane it had become, that we needed so many official bodies to protect a private structure from one determined neighbor who refused to read the law. My phone blew up with messages from people across town, offering support or telling me about their run-ins with Karen. She'd apparently once threatened to tear out an old oak tree because it overshadowed her carefully planned landscaping. That homeowner gave in, not wanting a fight, and lost a beloved tree. Now, seeing me resist, folks rallied behind me. Karen, cornered by negative press, decided to spin a new story that I'd falsified documents about the tower's historical status. She started whispering that I'd used forged letters from the local heritage registry. The city and state officers, though, quickly refuted that, publicly verifying the tower's official listing. Furious, Karen tried calling an urgent HOA membership meeting, presumably to pass a motion that would override my tower's special status, but the board refused to convene such a meeting, citing how it conflicted with real city and state law. She stormed out, binder clutched, threatening to handle matters her own way. Everyone braced for more midnight bulldozers. Instead, we got a letter from an attorney representing the State Historical Commission. They were initiating legal proceedings to ensure no further attempts to alter or demolish the tower, plus they'd hold Karen personally accountable for any past damage. The letter also demanded she relinquish any claim of HOA authority on this matter. That was the final blow. The board, not wanting to be implicated, quickly distanced themselves. Neighbors demanded Karen resign. She locked herself in the HOA clubhouse for half a day, then emerged with a statement claiming she'd done nothing wrong. But the membership forced a vote anyway. Turnout soared. People lined up around the block. The result was a near-unanimous vote to remove Karen as president. The fiasco that followed included the HOA insurance disclaiming any coverage for unauthorized bulldozer hires. Rumor had it Karen faced personal liability for the partial damage. She tried calling it a witch hunt. The law was unmoved. With Karen dethroned, Willow Falls took a deep breath. The board apologized publicly to me, clarifying they never endorsed demolition or recognized any courtesy rule demanding the tower's removal. I offered to show them the tower's interior if they wished to see how stable it was. Some neighbors accepted, marveling at the old stone steps, the half-rusted but sturdy iron fittings. They realized it was a piece of living history that predated this entire modern development. Soon, the local historical society helped me secure minor funding to restore some worn mortar, ensuring the tower remained safe for decades to come. Karen? She retreated from public view. People said she tried disclaiming responsibility for the bulldozer fiasco, but the paper trail was damning. The city threatened potential fines or legal measures. Some saw a for sale sign appear on her house, then vanish a week later, presumably because she couldn't get the price she wanted. We heard rumors she was planning to move out of Willow Falls quietly. By then, few tears would be shed.as for me. I still live in the old house with the tower. I do occasional tours for school kids, showing them the vantage from the top step, telling them how it was used historically to watch the farmland below. My father's memory lingers in every stone, and I'm proud it remains protected by real laws that not even the most stubborn HOA tyrant can override. My neighbors have rallied around the tower too, seeing it as a symbol of how we overcame petty tyranny. Some laugh about how we let one woman nearly bulldoze a century's worth of heritage, but we turned it into a unifying cause.so. That's the entire saga of how Karen tried to tear down an old tower, called the cops at her multiple times, and ended up facing a meltdown of her own. If you learned anything, it's that bullies with clipboards can't stand real facts and unity from the neighborhood. They thrive in silence and fear. Once we shine a big spotlight and, in this case, get city and state officers on board, they crumble under their own illusions of power. If you found yourself rooting against Karen in this wild ride, drop a like on this video and be sure to subscribe to my channel for more real-life HOA sagas. Let's keep these stories flowing. And please, jump in the comments. Let me know which city you're tuning in from. I'm always amazed at how far these Karen tales travel. Together, we'll make sure every law-bending neighbor meets their match. And hey, if you're dealing with your own local tyrant, remember, knowledge, unity, and a healthy respect for real legal documents can topple even the mightiest. Karen.